The garden looked ordinary in the soft hush of evening. Neatly trimmed hedges. A wooden bench warmed by the last traces of sunlight. Wind chimes whispering as the breeze drifted through lavender and mint. It was the kind of quiet that settled gently on the chest, peaceful, familiar, safe. Every night, just as the sky turned a deeper shade of blue, the dog appeared. He moved without hurry, paws pressing lightly into the soil as if he already knew where to step. He didn't chase moths or roll in the grass like other dogs might. Instead, he walked the same path, slow and deliberate, stopping near the center of the garden. There, he sat. Still. Focused. Watching. His eyes never wandered. Not to the house. Not to the fence. Only to the small patch of earth near the old rose bush. From the porch, a human presence noticed him at first with a soft smile, then with curiosity. Why there? Why every night? The dog's posture wasn't playful or restless. It was calm. Intent. Almost respectful. Sometimes he lowered his head, breathing gently, as if listening to something beneath the silence. Other nights, his tail rested motionless against the ground, his body alert but peaceful like a guardian who knew his duty. The garden felt different when he was there. Warmer. Fuller. As though something unseen had quietly arrived with him. The human watched night after night, heart slowly tightening with questions that had no words yet. There was no fear in the air. Only a tender mystery, one wrapped in stillness and devotion. Because whatever the dog sensed was not random. And the meaning behind his nightly vigil would turn out to be far more beautiful than anyone imagined. The garden always changed first. Not the sky. Not the street. The garden. It softened as the day slipped away, colors dimming gently, shadows stretching without hurry. The roses leaned inward, as if sharing a secret. Lavender released its final breath of the afternoon. Wind chimes whispered once, then settled. Ethan noticed it every evening. He would step onto the back porch with a mug warming his hands, pause for a moment, and let the quiet settle into him. The day never followed him out here. Not fully. The garden didn't allow that. It was a place where noise lost its grip. He sat on the wooden step, the boards faintly creaking beneath his weight, and watched the light fade across the grass. The bench near the center of the yard glowed softly, still holding onto the sun. Beyond it stood the old rose bush, thicker than the rest, its branches slightly uneven, as if shaped by years of careful hands. That was when the dog appeared. No announcement. No rush. One moment the garden was empty. The next, he was there. He entered through the side gate, nudging it open just enough to pass through, as if he'd done it 100 times before. Maybe more. His paws moved quietly over the stone path, nails clicking once, twice, then falling silent as he reached the grass. Ethan's mouth curved into a small smile. There you are, he said softly. The dog didn't look at him. He was a medium-sized retriever mix, honey gold fur with faint white around the muzzle. His ears were relaxed, his tail low but calm, moving only when his steps required it. There was no excitement in his gait. No hesitation either. Just purpose. He walked the same path every night, along the edge of the garden, past the herbs, around the bench, and stopped. Always there. Near the rose bush. He sat down slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to disturb the ground beneath him. His posture straightened. His head lifted slightly. His gaze fixed on the small patch of earth at the base of the bush. And he stayed. No barking. No pacing. No searching. Just stillness. Ethan watched from the porch, curiosity settling in his chest like a quiet knock. He had noticed the dog a week ago. Maybe longer. At first, he thought it was coincidence, a neighbor's dog wandering through, taking a liking to the yard. But coincidence didn't repeat itself like this. Every evening. The same time. The same place. Ethan took a slow sip from his mug. What are you guarding? He murmured. The dog's ears twitched. Not toward Ethan. Toward the ground. The air felt different when the dog was there. Not heavy. Not tense. Just fuller. As if the garden was holding its breath alongside him. A breeze moved through, lifting a few petals from the rose bush. One drifted down, landing inches from the dog's paws. He didn't react. His eyes remained soft, focused, almost listening. Ethan leaned forward slightly. He felt it then, the gentle tightening behind the ribs. The one that came when something mattered, but hadn't revealed itself yet. "Buddy," Ethan said quietly, testing the word. The dog's tail gave one slow sweep against the grass. That was all. No approach. No glance. Ethan chuckled under his breath. "All right," he said. "I get it." He leaned back, letting the moment stretch. The sky deepened into a richer blue. Porch lights flickered on in nearby houses. Somewhere, a door closed. A car passed in the distance. But the garden stayed wrapped in its hush. Minutes passed. The dog lowered his head slightly, nose hovering just above the soil. He inhaled slow, measured. As if memorizing something. Then he lifted his head again, posture unchanged. Ethan felt the question forming before he could stop it. Why here? He had lived in this house for years. Knew every corner of the yard. He planted the rose bush himself, carefully, patiently, following instructions he could still hear in someone else's voice. He swallowed. The dog shifted just enough to settle his weight more comfortably. Still watching. Still present. Ethan stood, the porch boards creaking again. He stepped down onto the grass, careful not to break the quiet. Each footfall felt louder than it should have. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, unsure why he did. The dog didn't move. Ethan took that as permission. He sat on the bench, close enough now to see the dog's breathing. Slow. Even. Peaceful. The light from the porch brushed over the scene, warm and low, casting long shadows that didn't feel lonely, just reflective. Ethan rested his hands on his knees. "I don't know what you're doing," he said softly. "But it feels important." The dog finally turned his head, just slightly. Not to meet Ethan's eyes. Only enough for Ethan to see the calm in his expression. The quiet certainty. Then the dog looked back at the rose bush. As if to say, "Stay." Ethan stayed. They sat together until the sky turned dark and the stars began to appear, one by one. When the night air cooled, the dog finally stood. He took one last look at the ground, lowered his head again for a brief moment, then turned toward the gate. He paused. Looked back at Ethan. And for the first time, their eyes met. There was no sadness there. No fear. Only recognition. Then the dog slipped through the gate and disappeared into the night. Ethan remained on the bench long after. The garden felt quieter without him. Emptier, somehow. And for the first time, Ethan knew this wasn't just a habit. Whatever the dog sensed, whatever pulled him back night after night, was tied to this place. And to a memory that hadn't finished speaking yet. The second night, Ethan watched for him. Not casually. Not by accident. He finished dinner earlier than usual. Left the dishes in the sink. Turned off the television before the credits finished rolling. When dusk began to gather at the edges of the windows, he found himself standing by the back door waiting. The garden slipped into evening the same way it always did. Slow. Unassuming. Almost careful. Crickets began their low rhythm. The air cooled just enough to be noticeable. Ethan stepped onto the porch with his mug, though he barely tasted the tea this time. He looked toward the side gate. Nothing yet. He exhaled and told himself not to feel foolish. Dogs wandered. Patterns happened. Meaning wasn't always hiding behind routine. Still. He waited. Then. A soft click. The gate moved. Not all the way. Just enough. The dog slipped through like a shadow made of light. Ethan felt his chest loosen. There you are, he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. The dog didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to scan the yard or sniff the air like most dogs would. He walked with quiet certainty, paws following the same path as the night before. Stone to grass. Grass to soil. Ethan noticed things he hadn't noticed before. The way the dog slowed as he neared the rose bush. The way his shoulders relaxed, as if crossing into familiar ground. The way his breathing changed, deeper, steadier. He stopped at the same spot. Saturday. Stillness settled around him again, gentle and complete. Ethan remained on the porch this time. He didn't want to interrupt whatever this was. The light from the house stretched across the lawn, touching the dog's back in a warm glow. His fur caught the light softly, like it had been brushed with gold. Minutes passed. The dog didn't move. Ethan leaned against the railing, folding his arms loosely. "You don't even look bored," he murmured. As if in response, the dog lowered his head slightly, nose hovering just above the earth. He inhaled, slow and intentional, then lifted his head again. His eyes remained calm. Focused. Listening. Ethan felt it again. That quiet pull. That sense of witnessing something private. He tried to remember if he'd ever seen a dog behave like this before. Loyal dogs, yes. Protective dogs. Playful ones. Anxious ones. But this wasn't any of that. This was devotion without urgency. Attention without anxiety. The dog wasn't guarding against something. He was guarding for something. Ethan rubbed his thumb along the rim of his mug, lost in thought. He followed the dog's gaze to the base of the rose bush. The soil there looked no different from the rest of the garden. Dark. Well-tended. Ordinary. And yet, the dog's presence made it feel marked. As though the ground itself remembered being touched. A breeze moved through the garden, lifting the leaves slightly. The dog's ears flicked once, then settled. His tail remained still. Ethan stepped down from the porch this time. Slowly. Mindful of the sound his shoes made against the grass. He stopped several feet away, not wanting to cross some invisible line. "You don't mind company," Ethan said quietly. "It's not company you're here for, though." The dog didn't turn. But his breathing stayed calm. That felt like an answer. Ethan sat cross-legged on the grass, the coolness seeping through his jeans. From here, he could see the details, the faint gray at the dog's muzzle. A small scar near one ear. Signs of a life lived gently, but fully. "How long have you been doing this?" Ethan asked. The dog's chest rose, fell. Night deepened. The sky grew darker, stars beginning to press through. The garden lights flicked on automatically, casting soft halos along the path. The dog didn't react. He remained exactly as he was. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not sadness. Not yet. More like a door cracking open. Letting in air he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He thought about routines. How humans built them to survive. How dogs seemed to honor them. This one felt older than habit. At one point, the dog leaned forward slightly. His nose touched the soil, just barely. He stayed like that for a few seconds, eyes closed. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know why. The dog lifted his head again and resumed his quiet watch. His posture returned to its gentle alertness, like a sentry standing watch at a peaceful post. Time moved differently out here. When the night air cooled further, the dog finally shifted. He stood, stretched once, then turned in a small circle, careful not to disturb the spot where he'd been sitting. Before leaving, he did something new. He stepped closer to the rose bush. Very close. He lowered his head, and nudged the soil gently with his nose. Not digging. Not scratching. Just touching. A brief, tender gesture. Then he stepped back. Ethan held his breath without realizing it. The dog turned toward the gate but paused again, just like the night before. This time, he looked directly at Ethan. His eyes held something warm. Steady. Familiar. As if confirming. "You saw that?" Ethan nodded. "I did," he said softly. The dog's tail gave one slow sweep. Then he was gone. The gate clicked shut behind him. Ethan stayed seated long after the dog disappeared. The garden felt quieter again, but not empty. More like it was waiting. Waiting for him to understand. As Ethan finally stood and headed back inside, one thought stayed with him, clearer than the rest. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. The dog wasn't just visiting the garden. He was returning to it. And whatever lived in that small patch of earth had been loved. Deeply. By the third evening, Ethan no longer pretended this was accidental. He planned for it. Work emails were answered earlier. Dinner was simpler. When the sun dipped low and the house began to glow from the inside, Ethan found himself checking the time, not with impatience, but with anticipation. The garden waited. So did he. He stepped onto the porch just as the sky softened into twilight, the gentle in-between where day hadn't fully let go and night hadn't claimed its place yet. The air carried the scent of damp soil and crushed leaves. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor laughed. Somewhere farther away, a radio played low. Ethan barely noticed. His eyes were on the gate. When it opened, he felt it before he saw it. That same quiet click. That same careful entry. The dog appeared right on time. Ethan smiled without thinking. "Hey," he said softly. The dog moved as he always did, steady, unhurried, certain. But tonight, Ethan noticed something new. The dog glanced around. Not searching. Not nervous. Just aware. As if confirming the world was still where it belonged. Then he continued along his familiar path and settled by the rose bush, sitting with that same dignified stillness. The garden seemed to rearrange itself around him, shadows aligning, light resting gently on his back. Ethan didn't stay on the porch this time. He stepped onto the grass and walked slowly, stopping several feet away. Close enough to feel included. Far enough to remain respectful. "I was wondering if you'd come," he admitted. The dog's ears twitched. No turn. No movement. But Ethan felt heard. He lowered himself onto the bench, hands clasped loosely. From here, the small details felt louder than sound: the rhythm of the dog's breathing, the subtle shift of weight in his shoulders, the way his eyes softened when the breeze stirred the rose bush. Ethan followed that gaze again. The patch of earth hadn't changed. Or maybe it had. Maybe it was Ethan who had changed. "What's so important about that spot?" he asked quietly. The dog lowered his head slightly, eyes closing for a moment longer than before. His nose hovered just above the soil, not touching this time, just listening. Ethan's curiosity deepened, not sharp, not demanding. Gentle. Careful. He leaned forward. "You come every night," he said. "Same time. Same place." He paused. "I don't think you do that for no reason." The dog's tail moved once. Slow. Deliberate. Ethan's chest tightened, not painfully. More like recognition settling into place. He thought about how long it had been since he'd really noticed anything. Since routine had become something to endure instead of something to honor. This dog, this quiet ritual, it felt like a reminder. A reminder that some things deserved consistency. That some things asked to be remembered. Ethan glanced at the rose bush again. His throat tightened unexpectedly. He remembered kneeling there once. Dirt under his nails. Someone standing nearby, offering advice he pretended not to need. "Not too deep," a voice had said. "Let the roots breathe." Ethan shook his head slightly, grounding himself back in the present. The dog lifted his head and looked toward him, not fully. just enough for Ethan to catch the edge of his gaze. Their eyes met briefly. The dog's expression didn't change. But something passed between them. Trust, maybe. Or permission. Ethan swallowed. "All right," he murmured. "I'll take it slow." The night settled around them again. Crickets filled the quiet. The garden lights cast warm circles along the path, turning the space intimate, protected. Ethan didn't ask more questions. He simply stayed. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time stretched, softened. The dog remained steady, breathing slow and even, eyes open but peaceful. Watching. Guarding. Remembering. When the dog finally rose, Ethan felt it coming like a shift in the air. The dog stepped closer to the rose bush again, paused, and lowered his head. This time, he stayed there a beat longer. His nose brushed the soil gently. Ethan's chest tightened again. He didn't know why, but he felt the weight of it. The care. The meaning layered into something so small. When the dog turned to leave, he didn't hurry. He stopped by the gate. Looked back. Ethan stood. "I'll be here tomorrow," he said quietly. "Just so you know." The dog's tail gave the familiar slow sweep. Then he was gone. The gate closed softly behind him. Ethan remained standing in the garden, the silence wrapping around him like a held breath. He looked at the rose bush one more time, seeing it now with different eyes. Not as a plant, but as a marker. As he turned toward the house, curiosity no longer felt like a question. It felt like an invitation. By the fourth night, the garden felt shared. Not owned. Not occupied. Shared. Ethan noticed it the moment he stepped outside. The air carried a familiar expectation now, like a quiet agreement between the fading light and the space itself. He didn't bring a mug this time. His hands were empty. Open. Waiting. He sat on the bench before the gate even moved. The sky dimmed slowly, brushing the clouds with soft violet and gray. A single porch light clicked on somewhere down the block. The world settled into its evening rhythm. Then, the gate opened. The sound no longer surprised him. The dog entered as he always did, calm and composed, paws following the remembered path. But tonight, he slowed. Just slightly. As if aware Ethan was already there. Ethan felt the smallest smile touch his lips. "Evening," he said. The dog paused, not by the gate, not near the bench, but halfway between. He turned his head enough to look at Ethan fully this time. Their eyes met in the low light, warm and steady. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just acknowledgement. Then the dog continued on, settling by the rose bush with the same careful grace. He sat. Straightened. Watched. Ethan didn't move. He let the silence do the talking. Minutes passed without either of them shifting. The garden lights hummed softly. Shadows deepened, but the warmth remained. Ethan felt something unfamiliar in his chest, not longing exactly. More like alignment. Like he was finally sitting in the right place at the right time. He leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the bench. "You don't need me here," he said quietly. "But you don't mind me either." The dog's ears flicked once. Ethan exhaled. That was enough. He watched the dog's breathing, the subtle rise and fall of his chest. The way his focus never wavered from the patch of soil beneath the rose bush. It was as if the dog were holding space, protecting something fragile and precious without ever touching it. Ethan felt a slow warmth spread through him. He hadn't realized how much he missed this kind of quiet. The kind that didn't feel empty. The kind that felt full of presence. He shifted his weight on the bench, the wood creaking softly. The dog didn't react. His trust felt complete now, unspoken, but solid. Ethan leaned forward. "I used to sit out here a lot," he said. "Before." The word lingered. The dog's posture softened just a fraction, like he was listening with more than ears. I stopped, Ethan continued. Didn't think it mattered anymore. A breeze moved through the garden, brushing against Ethan's face. The rose bush rustled gently. A petal loosened and drifted down, landing near the dog's paws. The dog looked at it. Then back at the ground. Ethan swallowed. He didn't know why the moment felt heavy, but it did. Not in a painful way. In a tender one. Like touching a memory without naming it. He stood slowly and stepped off the bench, moving closer than he had before. He stopped a few feet away, careful not to cross the invisible boundary that seemed to surround the spot. The dog didn't tense. Didn't move. Ethan crouched, resting his elbows on his knees. You're not waiting for something to happen, he said softly. You're remembering something that already did. The dog's tail moved once. Slow. Intentional. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He stayed there with him, two quiet figures in a garden that felt older than the night itself. The dog's presence anchored him. Made the silence feel safe. When the dog finally rose, Ethan felt it like a gentle pull. The dog stepped closer to the rose bush, lowered his head, and rested his nose against the soil for a long moment. His eyes closed. Ethan didn't breathe. The dog lifted his head again and turned toward Ethan. This time, he walked closer, just a step or two. Not all the way. Enough to bridge something invisible. They looked at each other. No words. No need. Ethan nodded, as if accepting something he hadn't yet understood. Thank you, he whispered, unsure what he was thanking him for. The dog turned toward the gate. Paused. Then laughed. The garden felt quieter afterward, but not lonely. Ethan remained crouched for a long time, staring at the rose bush. He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against one of the leaves. It felt warm from the day, alive and steady. For the first time, Ethan realized. This wasn't just the dog's ritual anymore. It was becoming his. By the fifth night, the garden no longer felt silent. It felt like it was speaking. Not in words, in pauses, in patterns, in the way the air shifted when the dog arrived. Ethan noticed it as soon as he stepped outside. The rose bush seemed fuller somehow, its leaves catching the last light with more intention. The soil beneath it looked darker than the rest of the garden, richer, like it had been touched more often. Not disturbed. Tended. Ethan sat on the bench before dusk finished settling. He didn't check his phone. Didn't bring a drink. He just sat and waited. The gate opened right on time. The dog entered quietly, but tonight he stopped. Just inside the gate. Ethan's heart skipped, soft but sudden. You all right? Ethan asked gently. The dog looked around the garden slowly, as if noticing things Ethan had never learned to see. The bench. The path. The rose bush. Then Ethan. Their eyes met. The dog held the gaze longer than before. Then he continued. His steps were slower tonight. More deliberate. When he reached the rose bush, he didn't sit immediately. He stood there for a moment, head lowered, breathing in the scent of the soil, the petals, the air itself. Ethan leaned forward. Something's different, he murmured. The dog sat at last, but closer to the bush than usual. His posture was intense. It was attentive. Like someone listening for a familiar voice in a crowded room. Ethan followed his gaze and noticed something he'd missed before. A small wooden marker. Half hidden beneath the leaves. His breath caught. He stood and approached carefully, stopping just short of the dog's space. The dog didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't shift. His trust remained steady. Ethan crouched and brushed aside a few leaves. The marker was old. Weathered. No name carved into it. Just a simple heart etched by hand, uneven but intentional. Ethan's chest tightened. I don't remember putting this here, he whispered. The dog lowered his head again, nose hovering just above the marker this time. His breathing slowed even further. Ethan felt the truth brushing against him now, soft, insistent. This wasn't about guarding. It was about remembering. He sat back on his heels, the grass cool beneath him. Memories stirred, quiet ones. Hands in the dirt. Laughter carried on warm evenings. Someone kneeling beside him, brushing soil from their palms, smiling like this place mattered. Because it did. The dog shifted slightly and nudged the marker, just barely. Not enough to move it. Just enough to touch it. Ethan's eyes burned. You knew, he said softly. You've always known. The dog lifted his head and looked at Ethan, not searching, not questioning. Confirming. The breeze moved through the garden again, and this time Ethan felt it differently. It wasn't just air. It was presence. He reached out and placed his hand flat against the ground, close to the marker. The soil felt cool. Solid. Alive. The dog stayed beside him. Together, they sat there until the stars began to appear, one by one. When the night grew cooler, the dog finally stood, but instead of leaving immediately, he stepped closer to Ethan. Close enough that Ethan could feel his warmth. The dog leaned gently into his side. Just for a moment. Ethan closed his eyes. When he opened them, the dog had already turned toward the gate. But Ethan knew now. The garden wasn't just holding a memory. It was sharing it. The sixth night arrived quietly, but it didn't feel the same. Ethan sensed it before the sky finished dimming, a subtle heaviness in the air, not sad, just full. He stepped into the garden slower than usual, as if the ground itself had asked him to. The rose bush stood still, leaves barely moving, the small wooden marker resting beneath it like a held breath. Ethan didn't sit on the bench. He stood near the path, hands at his sides, waiting. The gate opened later than usual. That alone made his chest tighten. Then the dog appeared. He moved more slowly tonight. Not tired, careful. His head was slightly lowered, ears relaxed but alert. Each step felt intentional, as if he were walking into something sacred. Ethan swallowed. You're late, he said softly. It's okay. The dog didn't respond the way he usually did. He didn't walk straight to the rose bush. Instead, he paused midway across the lawn and stood there, breathing deeply, eyes scanning the garden as though he were seeing it through memory rather than sight. Then he looked at Ethan. Fully. The look wasn't urgent. It wasn't worried. It was inviting. Ethan felt it immediately. You want me to come with you, he whispered. The dog turned and continued forward, but slower this time. Deliberate enough that Ethan followed. They stopped together beside the rose bush. The dog didn't sit. He stood close to the ground, nose hovering above the marker, breathing softly. His body trembled just slightly, not fear, not pain. Emotion. Ethan knelt beside him. The garden lights glowed warmly, casting soft shadows that felt almost protective. The world beyond the fence faded completely. It's different tonight, Ethan said. I feel it too. The dog lowered his head until his nose touched the soil and stayed there. Longer than ever before. Ethan's breath caught. Something loosened inside his chest, something he'd been holding tight without realizing it. He placed his hand on the ground again, fingers brushing the edge of the marker. The carved heart felt smoother than he expected, worn by time and touch. That's why you come, Ethan whispered. Not to guard, but to keep her company. The dog exhaled slowly. A deep, steady release. Ethan closed his eyes. Memories surfaced, not sharply, not painfully. Just warm flashes. Laughing in this very garden. Knees pressed into the soil. A voice reminding him to water gently. A promise made quietly, never spoken out loud. The dog shifted closer, his shoulder touching Ethan's arm. They stayed like that for a long time. No movement. No sound. Just presence. When the dog finally lifted his head, his eyes were soft but bright. He looked at Ethan as if checking, "Are you ready?" Ethan nodded. "I remember," he said. "I think I stopped letting myself, but I remember." The dog sat then, for the first time that night, right beside the marker. Not watching it. Facing outward. As if his watch had changed. Ethan felt the shift immediately. This wasn't about holding the past anymore. It was about honoring it. The dog stood again and turned toward the gate, but this time he didn't leave right away. He looked back at the rose bush, then at Ethan. His tail moved slowly. Once. Ethan stood. "I'll be here," he said. "You don't have to do this alone." The dog seemed to relax, just a fraction, then walked to the gate and slipped into the night. The garden felt different after he left. Not quieter. Lighter. Ethan remained kneeling, the warmth of the dog still lingering at his side. For the first time in a long while, the memory didn't ache. It breathed. The seventh night didn't announce itself. It arrived gently, like a thought you don't realize you've been holding until it finally speaks. Ethan stood at the kitchen sink, hands resting on the counter, watching dusk settle through the window. He didn't rush. Didn't prepare. He already knew where he needed to be. The garden. When he stepped outside, the air felt warmer than the night before. Softer. The rose bush caught the remaining light, its petals pale and open, as if they had been waiting. Ethan walked straight to the bench and sat. He didn't look at the gate. He trusted it. The click came right on time. The dog entered with quiet confidence, no hesitation now. His posture was relaxed, his steps smooth. Tonight, he didn't scan the garden. He came straight to Ethan. Stopped a few feet away. Saturday. Ethan's breath caught, not from surprise, but from something deeper. "Hi," he said softly. The dog's tail moved once, slow and steady. Then, together, they turned their attention to the rose bush. Ethan felt the understanding settle fully now, no longer a question, no longer a guess. The small wooden marker. The heart carved by hand. The care taken with the soil. He could see her again. Kneeling beside him, brushing dirt from her palms. Laughing when he planted the bush crooked the first time. Telling him gardens weren't about perfection, they were about patience. She loved this place, Ethan said quietly. The dog's ears relaxed even more. She used to talk to the plants, Ethan continued, a faint smile in his voice. Said they listened better than people. He glanced down at the marker. "I didn't know you'd remember." The dog stood and walked to the rose bush, lowering his head to the soil, just once. Not lingering this time. Not clinging. Honoring. Ethan stood and joined him. The truth came together softly now, piece by piece. The dog hadn't chosen this garden by chance. He had known her. Had followed her steps. Had felt her hands on his fur, her voice in the evenings, her presence woven into this space. When she was gone, the garden still carried her. And the dog had returned to keep that connection alive. Not in grief. In love. Ethan knelt and pressed his palm to the earth again. This time, it didn't feel cold. It felt familiar. "Thank you," he said, to the dog, to the garden, to the memory itself. The dog moved closer and sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. The contact was steady and grounding. They stayed that way as the stars emerged slowly overhead. No rush. No ache. Just warmth. When the dog finally stood, he didn't look toward the gate right away. He looked at Ethan first, eyes clear, calm, complete. As if to say, "You remember now." Ethan nodded. "I won't forget again." The dog turned and walked away, tail relaxed, steps light. When the gate closed behind him, the sound didn't feel like an ending. It felt like peace settling into place. Ethan remained in the garden long after, watching the rose bush sway gently in the breeze. The memory was no longer hidden. It lived right here, in the silence, where love still knew how to stay. The 8th night felt like morning. Not in light, but in feeling. Ethan stepped into the garden with bare hands and an open chest. The air was cool, calm, welcoming. The rose bush stood tall, petals catching the soft glow of the garden lights, leaves rustling gently as if greeting him back. He didn't sit on the bench. He knelt. Right there, beside the small wooden marker. The heart carved into it looked different now, not faded, not fragile. Just quiet. Steady. Honest. "I'm here," Ethan whispered. And for the first time in a long while, he meant more than presence. The gate opened. The dog entered without hesitation, no pause, no checking. His steps were easy now, unburdened. He walked straight toward Ethan and stopped beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Ethan smiled. "You don't have to watch anymore," he said gently. "I've got it." The dog sat, posture relaxed, tail resting softly against the grass. He looked toward the rose bush, not with vigilance, not with longing. With contentment. Ethan reached out slowly and rested his hand on the dog's back. The warmth beneath his palm felt grounding. Real. The dog leaned into the touch. Just enough. They stayed like that as the night deepened, stars blinking awake one by one. The garden no longer held its breath. It breathed freely, alive with memory, not weighed down by it. Ethan thought of all the nights he'd avoided this place. All the quiet he'd mistaken for emptiness. And how wrong he'd been. This silence wasn't absence. It was presence waiting to be felt. "I'll keep it alive," Ethan said softly. "The garden, the memories, all of it." The dog lifted his head and looked at him, ice calm and knowing. His tail moved once. Agreement. When the dog finally stood, he didn't rush to leave. He took one last look at the rose bush, then turned toward Ethan. They shared a moment, no words, no need. Then the dog walked to the gate. Paused. Looked back, not to check, not to question. To trust. Ethan nodded. The gate closed quietly behind the dog, but the garden didn't feel empty. It felt whole. Ethan stayed a while longer, hands resting on the earth, heart open. The rose bush swayed gently in the night breeze, petals glowing softly in the light. Love hadn't left this place. It had simply learned to wait. And now it had been found again.